So we have one more workshop. It is called Familiy Dynamics of Kinship Care and Behavioral Health Resources. Thank you, gentlemen.
My name is Bob Ximines, and I'm the Senior Member Services Supervisor at Community Behavioral Health. And I've been working in the field for about 30 years. With me today is Mr. Andy DeVos, but I want to start off with a short story, and it's a true story, so just kind of indulge me. I was born and raised right around the corner. When I say right around the corner, I mean on 50th and Sansom, right on the corner. My mother, my father, my grandmother, and my younger brother. We had a 3-story apartment building, and everything was fine. By the time I turned 8, let's just say there was something that happened in our extended family, and at the time, nobody really told me what was going on, but 2 of my cousins came to live with me, females. One was my age, 8 years old, and my other cousin was 10. So what does that mean? That means that my grandmother, somehow or another, because she was the leader, Nanny ran the show. She told my mother and my father, and by the way, it's my father's mother, that we were going to take them in. So what did that do? That means emotionally, logistically, and let's just say economically, our world turned upside down. I said we lived on 50th and Sansom. We wasn't rich. We was making it. Everything was doing good. But I will tell you that I struggled as a young person emotionally because my nanny, I had to share her with 2 of my cousins who I really didn't know. The little trips we used to have, the little extra money we used to have, we didn't have that anymore. And logistically, when I used to come downstairs and jump into her bed and then move into my bed, that didn't happen because there were 2 other people in the house. I say that to say that kinship care, Andy and I, we understand it because we've been working in this field and we talk to you on a daily basis. I actually lived through it for a minute, but before it was called kinship care, I didn't know what that was. All I know is we had family that was moving in with us. I will say that we worked through the problems, and it wasn't really that many problems. We worked through it, but my grandmother was the matriarch, and she ran the show. She said what we were going to do, when we were going to do it, and how we were going to do it. I say that to say before we start our presentation to give yourself a round of applause for whatever role you play in your loved one's life. And it's not quite 12 o'clock, and on a Saturday, I'd be in the back of West Catholic Field playing football, because this used to be West Catholic. And when we finished, I would go up, and my grandmother would take me up to 52nd Street, and we'd get our fish from underneath the L stop, and she'd take me to Woolworths to get my Army men. So I know what I'm talking about. I miss those days, amen. I miss those days. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. There's just a couple of ground rules. First of all, I'm Bob, and that's Andy. We're no frills. What you see is what you get, minus the suit. I wear sneakers and shirts to work. But I figure if I was going to come here, if I'm going to be important, I got to look important. So I'm going to go ahead and do what I have to do.
Yeah, Bob doesn't have his white sneakers on today, so you know you're all right.
Andy is a very knowledgeable individual, and I've learned a lot from him, especially in this particular area of kinship care. So without further ado, Mr. Andy DeVos.
Thanks, everybody. Our biggest reason we're here is because we know you may have questions about behavioral health services, and our biggest fear is that you're struggling alone with those questions. So just remember, community behavioral health, we're open 24/7, 365, and there's always a place where you can turn to have your questions answered. We're going to do our best to answer them today. We realize that a lot of times the questions don't have easy answers to them, but we're basically here to partner with you around that. Everybody like Bob's story? Relate to Bob's story? Right? Okay, we want to keep this real about, it's come up earlier. You could feel it when I came in this morning. You could feel it with the panel. There are some real emotions that go on with this issue. That's what we want to acknowledge. High and low, good and bad. So just shout out some answers to this question. The day I decided to become a primary caregiver for my family member, I felt
overwhelmed.
Okay.
What else?
What else?
Scared. Alone.
Okay.
Surprised. Is that obligated?
Okay. Obligated. Did you hear that one? Who else is going to do this? Right. Any at the other end of the spectrum?
Wanted to run away.
As a tall man, I know what it's like to not be able to hide. Anxiety and depression. Actual behavioral health terms. Angry.
Angry, yes.
Very real emotion right there. Angry.
Ma'am. Why me?
I've raised my kids. Why do I have to go back to? It's like Monopoly when you have to go back to go. And thank you for everybody. Very real responses. Everybody relate to those responses? I want to hone in on what you just said, though. There's something really important in that, because we didn't get to... What did you notice about those responses that we heard? They're very real. They have an underlying kind of like anger, guilt. We didn't hear the word guilt, but but they're all towards the negative. But you said something very powerful right there, which was you were empowered to do something. And within all of those, somebody had to do something, right? So I just want to turn it on its head for a moment, and I'm not trying to be corny, but really, every person in here who did this stepped up. There's power in stepping up. Somebody had to do something. You were empowered to do something. That's heroic. You might not look at it that way. There are days that you don't look at it that way. So there are some words that you need to try to relate to, like empowered, like responsible, like the one who could step up. I know there are days when you don't feel that. I'm not trying to be glad-handed about it. I know there are days that you don't. But if you're not going to be able to change your circumstances here, one of the things you can try to do is change your reaction to your circumstances. Right? I stole that from James Dobson, by the way. I need to... But that's one of the things we're trying to do here. And that's a lot of what behavioral health is about. It's reframing your situation. Ideally, your situation might change over time, and those two sometimes are linked together. Your attitude, your feeling of being able to look forward, words like hope that you don't always have every day. These are words, that's part of what behavioral health is about. It's about bringing about change. Now, if you're having these emotions as the caregiver, we heard about it in a lot of this morning. Kids who move place to place, kids who have not had some of the basics that people come to expect, the kids are also confused. They also have a lot of emotional response. That's the one. There's going to be two big messages. And again, not to be corny, that's one. That you can do it. Not you can do it, you are doing it right now. It may not be pretty every day, but you are doing it. You're going to have questions. We're going to work to answer those. That's one of the big messages. And then the other one's a little more practical. I'll tell you about. Des? Thanks.
So our objectives today, what we wanted to do is we wanted to point out 3 important points. That we wanted to be able to provide background on how CBH, or part of the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services, as you heard from our commissioner earlier this morning, Dr. Evans, who we work for. We want to learn more about the types of services that are available to you as caregivers. And last but not least, we want to talk about how to access and get the most from the services that we have. That's the 3 things we want to try to do today.
Okay, this is some important stuff. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but one of the things you're going to hear about in the keynote is a word. It's a word I wasn't that familiar with, but it's really been a powerful one for me in the last few years, is resiliency. Resiliency is the ability to bounce back. The resiliency means when you wake up in the morning and you feel dread as your first emotion, and we all have that, hopefully not every day, it means you get up anyway. It means you try to turn your day towards the positive. That's an important one. Also at the bottom, the power of families and peers. For these next couple hours, I want you to literally right now look around. Look at each other. Look around. Look at somebody. Look at somebody you don't know. Because this is really, the experts are in the room. We got some information we can give you, but the real experts a lot of times are right beside you. So if you hear somebody's story that you say, wow, that sounds like mine, go find them.
We have a saying that goes, we keep what we have only by giving it away. There's no need for us to sit up in this room with all the information that you may have found or you may have found if you don't tell your neighbor next to you how to navigate through this system. It's a complicated system, as you've heard already this morning. But some of you have been able to find out other things that other of you haven't. And what you haven't found out, talk amongst each other, and then whatever else, we'll try to fill in the gaps.
So one of the things about peers is, in the adult mental health system, we actually can now fund people, use Medicaid money to fund people who are peer specialists. So imagine somebody who's had a disease like schizophrenia, major depression, and they're now well. Imagine how much they can speak into somebody's life who's resistant to treatment, who's not coming. One of the things we're advocating for big time and trying to figure out how to do is do this for children and family systems, so that we can actually, the state's a little slow to respond, but what we want to have in the future is actually Medicaid-funded positions as navigators. Anybody here who got into this say, I wish somebody who'd been through this could have actually told me some questions, right? So that's the idea there. And there are people in the room, unfortunately, they're not being paid by Medicaid yet, but that's what we're moving toward. Okay? Just to tell you a little bit about the Department of Behavioral Health, just some stats real quick. 465,000 people, that's how many people in Philadelphia have public assistance, have Medicaid, medical assistance. Okay? About 120,000 of them received some type of behavioral health treatment every year. When we say behavioral health treatment, what we mean is counseling, mental health therapy, medication, right up through psychiatric hospitalization. That's on the mental health side. But behavioral health is also substance abuse treatment services. So not all, but unfortunately many of the reasons that kinship care comes into play is somebody either has a major mental health challenge and or a major substance abuse challenge. And another family member steps in and says, my loved one, just because of those challenges, hasn't been able to care for their own. I'm going to step in and do it. So that's why we're here. And it was a no-brainer for us. We had one of the things since CBH has been around for 16 years. And basically what community behavioral health does, when you sign up for medical assistance, for basically welfare insurance, you get two insurances. You get physical health insurance, and that's where you pick from one of the 5 HMOs, Keystone Mercy, AmeriChoice, Coventry. But for the behavioral health side, you automatically get CBH. So we're automatically the funder of that side of the house. CBH is 16 years old. It was 16 years ago the state said, we're going to let Philadelphia County decide if they want to manage their own. And part of the reason is managed care. Part of the reason managed care exists is to try to get stuff to people quicker. So that's why they said, Philly, you do it because you know what some of your needs are, that type of thing. So really, CBH has been around for that long. One of the big things we try to do is go out into the community, and one of the things we saw very early was DHS, family court, was not a good situation for people with behavioral health challenges. So that's why we literally have staff who are over at family court, so that when families come into DHS, they're unpacking the reason why they're there. If that parent has a substance abuse issue, we can link them literally that day to treatment and services. Okay. These are just a few more of what you should be seeing if you're out in the treatment world, either taking your child to treatment and services. These are the things, some of the hallmarks. One of the number one things I want to point out here, and this is also a mindset thing. Remember I said you can't always change your circumstances, but you can sometimes change how you look at them. When I first got into mental health care, I worked at Germantown and Lehigh. It was called the Charles Drew Center. It became the Warren E. Smith Community Mental Health Center. And I did assessments, which the secret is I'm not a psychologist. I'm not really a social worker. But I got into the field. I had the right degree enough to go in. So what I am is a storyteller. So I learned how to write assessments and actually how to assess people for behavioral health needs, because it's really just writing their story. And if you're you can write a human. One of the things, especially when your kids are acting crazy, ripping and running, it's hard to lose sight of is they have strengths. And one of the hardest things for me when I was doing assessments is I would get to the part about goal setting, and I would say, what are your strengths? And it got very hard, and I'm not blaming the parent or the kid. A lot of them were kinship, a lot of them were grandparents. They just had trouble seeing, oh, this kid, all he's doing is, if you saw him in my home, all he's doing is ripping stuff up, not minding, all of these things. It's really important to take a pause and say, what are the strengths? Again, it's a mindset thing. And also, one of the things that really broke my heart was, and you see this a lot, was when you got to, okay, what's your treatment goal? What do you want to get out of treatment? Especially with the males, it was two things. Don't want them dead, don't want them in jail. Those aren't goals. So part of this is being able, I know sometimes you feel like you can't dream bigger. Part of that starts with strengths. What are the strengths? What's my child like to do? What are they good at? Everybody's good at something. I know sometimes it's hard to see on any given day.
Okay, we're back to that number. Dr. Evans has spoke about today, and he talks about certain numbers you need to take away if by any chance you need to access Medicaid. We're talking medical assistance for those who may not have it. These are the numbers that you need to do. Department of Public Welfare's number, and it tells you how you can apply for medical assistance, and it also has the hotline number. I said before, the gentleman in the hallway has a resource guide that Dr. Evans held up before, and make sure if you don't take anything today, you take that I guess is a quarter-fold piece of paper that has all those numbers and all those things that you might need for various reasons. Des? And this is the number that's the most important.
This is the other slide. If you don't remember anything else.
And that's written on everything. Plus, you don't have to really write it down. I got cards in my pocket. We got cards out at the desk. But this is the toll-free 88 number that reaches my department, that the people in my department answer 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You will get a live person. And they will be able to, if they can't answer your question, they will direct you to the right person who can. For whatever reason. Des? We put this slide up in here. The Department of Behavioral Health, we work right across the hall with another entity, and it's called BHSI. It stands for Behavioral Health Special Initiative. Now, this is for adults. Now, when we say adults, when it comes to the DNA world, drug and alcohol, basically adults are like 14 years of age. So if they have a substance abuse issue and they don't have any treatment, this is the number that you need to call. That's also in that informational resource guide as well.
All right, we're going to move through these next few pretty quickly so we can get to some question and answers. A lot of people say, well, what happens if I have to take my child for counseling? What happens? It all starts with the assessment, really. And the assessment is basically sitting down with somebody and telling the story. So one thing I just want to point out, whoever knows the most about that child really can be present and should be present. I'm gearing it more towards children, but same thing with adults. Because remember I told you about it's really just storytelling. It's the more you can tell about what happened. And the thing about mental health conditions or psychiatric conditions, sometimes they have biology basis, like a kid with ADHD who just can't sit still, hyperactive, or a kid with autism, something like that. Sometimes, so that's sort of the nature versus nurture. That's sort of the what's in the genes. But then a lot of times people or adults are reacting to what's happened to them. And one of the things we've worked most with our system is trauma. And many of the family members that you're dealing with, unfortunately, have been exposed to trauma. So all of our providers are really geared towards trauma treatment. So in order to figure out what's the best course of treatment, what type of counseling, what type of services, which we're going to talk about, it starts with assessment, which is basically telling the story. What I urge all of you to do, you probably do this already, if you're caring new for a loved one, especially a kid, start to keep a diary, start to keep a record book. Start to keep it. Man, when I hit my 40s, my brain just, I don't know what happened. I just can't remember things. I'll see people that I've known for 10 years, and I'll be like, oh, you. I can't remember the name. So we're all human that way. I urge you, especially around behavioral health treatment, just keep a folder, keep a file. If a kid gets a psychiatric evaluation, that type of thing, keep it. That's a little story of their life. And the important part of an assessment is at the end it will have recommendations. That's what you want to pay the most attention to. I'm not big into diagnosis, but I'm big into recommendations. What do you think is best for the person? Now this is really the menu of services. This is where, if the assessment is done, depending on what the behavior of the child or adult is, this is more geared towards kids, but the same is for adults. This is really just the menu of services that they can get. Outpatient care, individual, family therapy, that's really where a lot of the healing can begin. Medication management, we're not big on pushing medications, but a lot of times they can be very helpful, whether it's for depression, whether it's for hyperactivity. Wraparound services. Anybody familiar with wraparound services? Raise your hand. A lot of kids in the system get what are called BHRS, Behavioral Health Rehabilitative Services, and that's basically where the people can come to you, whether it's in the school. Some of those are school-based services. Then we do have inpatient psychiatric services if things are so severe that the person is really deemed kind of a danger to themselves or someone else. And you may not know, but there are psychiatric services for kids, inpatient services for kids, residential treatment, and then family-based services. These are just some numbers about how many kids are receiving treatment in the system, over 30,000 kids a year. Des, we can keep on moving. This just talks about some of the places where we're doing partnerships. I've mentioned DHS, where we have staff over there, doing more and more with the school district, because a lot of times what you find with kids is when they hit school, that's when their behavioral health issues get sussed out, because it's usually a lot of times through suspensions or that type of things. That's where, when I was an adolescent, when my parents thought something was going on with me, that's where it happened. So
this particular slide right here, and I'm not going to go through this too long because that's on that resource manual as well. These are you can go back real quick, Des. These are what we call the crisis response centers. They're located throughout the city. We're in West Philly, so that would be Mercy Hospital, and that's 9 out of 10 times for adult. What I really want you to pay attention to is the one that says the only CRC for children, which is the Einstein CRC, which is located at Germantown Hospital. If you have a child and it's an emergency, you need to take them to Germantown. I don't care how inconvenient it might be, because if you go anyplace else, they're just going to refer you to Germantown. But if it's a crisis and you can't manage it, take them to Germantown CRC. Okay? Thank you.
Yeah, one more. Yeah, this is just the one other place is the delegate's office. That number at the bottom. That's the mobile. That's for the mobile emergency team. And this is really if your child or loved one's behavior or presentation is so concerning that you really worry about their safety or yours. That's a place to call. These are some numbers. Now, if you're caring for your loved one, because we're part of what's called Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disabilities Services. Intellectual disabilities is now the term they used to call mental retardation. So if you have a child who comes into your care, one of the things we see about especially kids who aren't as connected or may have been neglected is they may not have developed at the same pace as some other kids. There are places in the city that are important to get help around developmental issues. If the child's under 3 years old, there's ChildLink, and they can do assessments of where the child is developmentally, but also bring in developmental services. And this is both physical development and intellectual development. So if a child is walking late, if the child doesn't have fine motor, can't seem to grasp, those type of things. If they're under 3, ChildLink. If they're 3 to 5, Elwyn Seeds program. And if they have been diagnosed as having mental retardation or an intellectual disability, it's important to register them because all of their future services, including after 21, go to them being registered. All right, so we want to take this last couple minutes just to open up to any questions, comments, thoughts people have.
We have some questions from the audience. The first is, what do you do as a grandparent when a child needs mental health services or therapy, but the parent doesn't want to get involved?
Well, normally that's on a case-by-case basis. That's why in the particular case that you were talking to, I told you to give me a call. Right. What we do, when you call that 888 number, you'll talk to a member service representative. You present that scenario. Right. We can't tell you exactly what to do, but we can tell you how to talk between the lines and how to read between the lines. Right. And we can give you some information, some suggestions that you might be able to go back to your loved one and maybe suggest that little Johnny or Sue maybe get that little bit of assessment. It's free. It's not going to cost anything. Our reps know how to talk, and if you can get them to at least talk to us, we can work our magic. Okay. So it's a possibility.
Okay. And I'll say on that, the situation differs if DHS is involved or not. Right. If DHS is involved, the one thing about having DHS involved, and I understand a lot of people are like, we're trying not to have DHS in our life. Okay. Well, that will actually help you because DHS will actually leverage the child to be able to get treatment by mediating with the parent. If you're trying to do it on your own and DHS is not involved, basically, if you can get the parent to consent to treatment and come to that at least one session to sign a consent form, once the consent is done, they can then consent to have another loved one really be the one to bring. But it's that initial consent is key to having them sign. So if the parent is saying, biological parent, and still has parental rights, is saying, I do not want to sign, I do not want my child to get therapy, and some people do. This is common. One reason they do, especially if it's been a bad situation, is they're afraid the child will go in and talk about what's going on there.
We got 5 minutes, Andy.
That's really where DHS, I understand why you don't want it, but that's where they can actually be a big help.
Another question. Are these services available outside of Philadelphia?
CBH itself, we will help try to guide you, but we're really for Philadelphia. However, anywhere you are in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, you have the same medical assistance availability. And wherever you are, it's managed by some entity like CBH.
Every county has its own entity, like Andy said. And even if you do nothing more than call that 88 number we're talking about, we can point you in the right direction and tell you where you need to go to.
What county are you in, if you don't mind me asking?
Yes, we got that. We can take care of that.
So it's called Magellan. Yeah, it's called Magellan Health Services, and Magellan is the CBH, if you will. Yes. Yeah.
Last thing I want everybody to do, and I know it's kind of cut off up there, but I want you to know it says, know that you made the right decision for your loved one, even as the journey continues. The purpose of that is that we know that we can't answer everything here today, nor will you be able to answer it when you go home this afternoon. But just know that there are resources, you're doing the right thing, and just continue to do what you're doing. With the help of the system and with people like you, it's going to get better. What I want to tell you before we go ahead is that we'll be around. For those who didn't answer the question, didn't feel like asking the question, we'll be around for the rest of the day. So make sure you come see us. You've been a beautiful audience, and I want to thank you.
Let's please thank Andy and Bob.